got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. It's Wednesday, December the 3rd, 2025. We've done lots of shows in the past on the broken American dream, all sorts of concern in the United States that the dream no longer exists. But other countries have dreams too. I never quite thought of China as having a dream, and certainly a broken dream, but that's the title of an intriguing new book by one of America's leading scholars on China, Minxin Pei, and the book is called The Broken China Dream, How Reform Revived Totalitarianism. Minxin is joining us from Claremont in California, where he teaches. Minxin, congratulations on the new book. What exactly is, or in your mind, what should be the Chinese dream?
Well, the Chinese dream, in my mind, should be a China that is prosperous, that is free, and that is part of the international community. And you can say China today is quite prosperous, but not exactly as prosperous as it can be. It is not free at all. And it is not exactly part of the international community. It is an odd man out. It's a very powerful country, but it has all kinds of problems with other members of the international community.
Although, to be fair to the international community, if it exists, I mean, the other three dominant members are also odd men out, certainly Russia and perhaps even the United States. In America, Minxin, as you know better than I do, the American dream is common currency. It's talked about by everybody, by citizens, by cultural analysts, by political scientists like yourself. Is there a notion of the Chinese dream in China itself? If we were in Beijing or Shanghai at a party or a cafe, and I went up to someone and said, well, what is the Chinese dream? What would people say?
I would say they will frame it probably very similar to what you would hear from an American in terms of material benefits, right? Because I think this is what most Americans would think of what their dreams should be. A house, a good job, kids' education, healthy. So American dreams, the American dream is framed in mostly, if not exclusively, in materialistic terms. That's because in the US, freedom has been taken for granted. Of course, you can debate whether that is the case anymore, right? But in the case of China, I think that is where China does, most Chinese people do not have. That is freedom from fear, freedom to say what they want, freedom to elect their governments. So that is, I think, a real China dream should include both the material aspects as well as the political aspects.
In America, the notion of an American dream is very much rooted in equal opportunity, everyone being able to make something of themselves. It's not a communist dream. It doesn't suggest everyone should be equal, but it is premised on equal opportunity. Would the same be true in China?
Yes, I think in the case of China, it's not just equal opportunity, but also the China dream rests a lot on individual efforts. Interestingly, when you look at popular opinion polls, most Chinese have very similar values to American values. They believe in individualism, they believe in equal opportunity, they believe in meritocracy.
And what about politics, Minxin? Obviously, the American dream is also rooted in the ideal or the promise of democracy, of everyone having the right to vote, of everyone being free to express themselves. Would the same be true in China?
No, unfortunately, I think that is a dream some people in China dare to have, but most people in China don't even want to think about. Because if you dare to think about freedom, the right to elect your own government, then you're likely to be in trouble.
The narrative, the conventional narrative, Minxin, again, don't need me to tell you this, is China was a poor country through one kind of economic reform or other over the last 25 years. It's gone from being an extremely poor country to one that now in many ways is driving the global economy. We've seen great rises in standard of living, in prosperity, in wealth. Isn't that proof that the Chinese dream actually exists?
I think
And is successful, certainly more than the United States, which has experienced relative decline, increasing inequality and political unrest.
I think to some extent, at least in material terms, the China dream has been partly realized. I grew up in China. I left China in 1985. When I left China, I was born in Shanghai. Shanghai had only 2 buildings taller than 20 stories. Today, you go to Shanghai, and it's a very modern city. So, in a very narrow materialistic sense, the Chinese dream has been partially realized. Why do I say partially? Because on a per capita level, China is still a relatively poor country. If you measure in dollars, per capita income in China is roughly $13,000, about a quarter of the US. If you measure in purchasing power, China is about $25,000. That's about a third of the US. So relative to the US, China is still not there yet. And of course, given income inequality in China, a lot of people in China actually live hand to mouth. So in a sort of narrow materialistic sense, part of the China dream has been realized.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, your book is quite critical of the regime. You have to give, in overall terms, maybe not so much in terms of 2025. I want to talk about the near term or short term later in this conversation. But you have to credit the Chinese Communist Party or the regime, whatever you want to call it, as being relatively successful in the first quarter of the 21st century, don't you?
Well, of course, I think the book does have a chapter on the Chinese economic miracle. The book recognizes the enormous material achievements China has made, but the Communist Party has played only a partial role. You have to credit the Chinese people, the enormous entrepreneurship, energy, just hard work 1.4 billion Chinese people have put into this enterprise. So I think the Communist Party deserves the credit for focusing on economic development after the death of Mao Zedong. Under Mao, China was a really dreadfully poor country. And of course, if you look at Chinese history, not in terms of what it has done since 1980, but what it has done since 1949, then you have a much more nuanced picture. That is, the Communist Party has done tremendous harm to itself, to the Chinese people. By the time of Mao's death, China was really an impoverished country because of its bad policies. And you can see 2 experiments. Experiment with totalitarianism under Mao, and then experiment with capitalism for much of the last 4 decades, and you see very dramatic results. So I think I would say that the most fair assessment you can make about the rule of the Chinese Communist Party is that it could have been much, much better.
And of course, it could have been much, much worse. One of the books that's been quite a hit this year, it's on the Financial Times shortlist for their Business Book of the Year, is Dan Wang's Breakneck, China's Quest to Engineer the Future. I'm sure you're familiar with the book.
Yes.
It basically presents the Chinese model as a state run by engineers and an engineering culture, and the American state and American society run by lawyers. Do you share that analysis? And would you share his argument that the engineering state has had some successes, but also is deeply problematic?
Oh, yeah. I think I share the second half. That is, well, China is a gigantic country because it's very complex. And if you look at China, there are obviously areas China has done extremely well. There are areas China has not really done that well. But to say that it's an engineering state and the US is a lawyer state, that's some sort of a simplification, if not oversimplification, because when you look at the backgrounds of most Chinese leaders, they might have education in engineering. But when you look at their actual work experience, not many of them worked as engineers. So I think that in terms of facts is not exactly correct. And when you see how China approaches its problems, not exactly approach every problem from an engineering, that is problem solving perspective. They approach from, as it happens in all societies, from a very political perspective. Let me just give you one simple example. In China, if you live in the countryside, you cannot move freely and live in the cities. China has effectively sort of two residential systems. And that system has done tremendous harm to Chinese society because it encourages inequality. It effectively makes about half of Chinese population second-class citizens, and it prevents people who are born in the countryside from realizing their full human potential. So if you want to solve this problem from a purely engineering perspective, let's just abolish this system. But Chinese leaders have resisted abolishing this system. And so far, that is, as a result, that is one of the biggest contributors to income inequality in China.
Minxin, your book has a very intriguing subtitle. It's one that in some ways is quite contradictory. How reform revived totalitarianism? We know that there was totalitarianism under Mao. Now, many people, I think, perhaps including yourself, maybe even in your last book, The Sentinel State, Surveillance and the Survival of Dictatorship in China, argue that totalitarianism now exists once again in China. What kind of reform are you talking about? Are you talking about Xi's reform?
No, I'm talking about Deng Xiaoping's reform. Deng Xiaoping's reform is economic reform only. When Deng Xiaoping came to power, or returned to power, 1979, he inherited a country that was on the verge of economic stagnation. Had been in economic stagnation for decades, and the country was very poor. The Communist Party was losing legitimacy, and he found a magic formula for saving the Communist Party. That is, using capitalist policies to save one-party rule, and that magic formula worked quite well. But at the end of the day, because the Communist Party was saved and the basic institutions of totalitarianism, as a result, were also saved, then when Xi Jinping came along, he wanted to revive the old system, and he succeeded. So today, the Chinese system, in many, is not exactly a Maoist system, I have to say. It's not 100% totalitarianism. I think where it really falls short is that the communist ideology no longer has real widespread influence, and the economy, a huge chunk of it, is not under state control. But other than that, it does not really look that different from the Maoist era. So today, I would say, I would be pretty confident to say that 75% of the Chinese system is totalitarian.
So and I'm probably getting myself into trouble here because I know so little about this, but my basic understanding of Deng Xiaoping is that his goal in reforming China wasn't in maintaining the power of the Chinese Communist Party. It was actually reforming China so that living standards would go up. And let's use the phrase, the Chinese dream might be realized. Are you suggesting that Deng Xiaoping was purely interested in maintaining the power of the Communist Party? That was his only goal in these great reforms that fundamentally changed China?
Oh, yes. Deng Xiaoping, as soon as he came to power in March 1979, he laid down so-called 4 cardinal principles. The most important one of the 4 is to maintain the rule of the Communist Party. So Deng Xiaoping, he wanted to make China rich so that the Communist Party could survive. He understood very clearly that a poor country will not support the rule of the Communist Party because the Chinese people could not tolerate a regime that fails year in and year out to deliver economic benefits to them. Deng Xiaoping got that right.
Are you suggesting then, I mean, this is sort of chicken and egg, I guess, and it's a question of semantics, but are you suggesting that these reforms had nothing to do with just wanting to make life in China better, that he actually cared about the lives of Chinese people and wanting to improve the quality of their lives in economic terms, particularly in the countryside?
I think relative to Mao, he certainly cared a lot more about the Chinese people, but he cared even more about the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. So let me just give you one example. 1989, he had a choice. He did not have to send tanks and the military to crush peaceful students in protest in Tiananmen Square. He surely knew that sending in the troops would jeopardize his economic relationship with the West. And we all know what he did. He chose to use extreme violence against peaceful protesters, even at the risk of jeopardizing his own economic modernization agenda.
In the Wang book, as I said, he compares in many ways China and America. America is a place where it's harder and harder to build stuff. There's the abundance argument about the failure to build high-speed trains and homes. Do you think that America has anything to learn from Deng Xiaoping's Chinese experiment in terms of getting stuff done, and indeed even Xi's China?
I think definitely the U.S. has a lot to learn. I've been living in the U.S. for 4 decades. Once I've observed about the U.S. system is like all other successful systems, after a while, things get ossified. That is, you get so accustomed to doing the things you think are the right, accustomed to doing things the way you think they ought to be done, while other countries are moving ahead. So when you look at infrastructure, look at transportation, look at education, look at a lot of other things, the US has a lot to learn from other countries. Incidentally, for a long time, China was the most advanced country in the world. And the rulers, as well as some of the people in China, saw they were the best. They had nothing to learn from other countries. We call them like frogs at the bottom of a well. They only knew that the sky was this sort of little opening above the opening of the well. I think the U.S. can fall into that trap. So the U.S. really need to open its eyes and look at other countries. So I think where the U.S. Should look at China is, should learn from China in some of the infrastructure projects and also clean energy transition. This is where China leads.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up clean energy. It seems that I don't want to turn this into another conversation on Trump because we talk too much about him. But it seems as if China has grasped a remarkable opportunity to dominate the 21st century economy in renewable energy. Is that fair? And does that reflect in some ways the success of, if not the Chinese dream, certainly the Chinese state that Deng Xiaoping and Xi have built?
Yeah, all countries make big bets. China has made successful bets on clean energy. Cost a lot. The country has plowed in God knows how many billions of dollars for a long time, subsidizing the industry. So that paid off. But it does not mean that all bets China has made have paid off. Let me give you just one example. China, up to this point, cannot produce an indigenous jet plane, civilian jet plane. It has subsidized this effort to the tune of $70+ billion, if not even more. And still,
that's not that much money. I mean,
yeah.
In terms of you talk about these big bets, it's not in the same size bet and the same class bet as renewable energy.
No.
And as with venture capitalists, 1 in 10, 2 in 10 big bets win. When you think of big bets, I take your point on China not winning all its big bets, but it's won, or it seems to be at least winning with renewable energy. When you compare it to the other great powers in the world, Russia doesn't seem to have any big bets except invading its neighbors. And it's not entirely clear to me what American big bets have been recently. How does China then, in that sense, when it comes to these big bets, how does it compare with Putin's Russia and indeed with Donald Trump's United States or Biden's United States that took a lot of big bets, none of which seem to have come off?
Well, I would say when China makes a big bet, because it's a one-party state, it can mobilize enormous resources. It can ask people to make huge sacrifices. It can force its people to make huge sacrifices. And that is something in a democracy, it is very difficult to do because people have to be educated, people have to know why it is important, and they have to agree that this is something that will be beneficial to their society in the long term. That obviously is not possible in a very polarized democracy such as the US. In the case of Putin, he is obsessed with restoring the old Russian Empire, and that's a very different aspiration. Chinese leaders, I think up to Xi Jinping, we'll talk about Xi Jinping later on, is that his predecessors played a very long game. They thought as long as they get the economy going, reach a certain stage, then they would be much more influential. And they were quite right.
Yeah, the Chinese are very good at long games. There was that famous interaction, I'm sure you remember it, between Kissinger and Chou En-lai when Kissinger asked
about the French Revolution.
Yeah, about the French Revolution, and Chou En-lai said, too early to tell. So maybe it's too early to tell about the Chinese Communist Party too. You mentioned that you left China, 40 years ago or 4 decades ago. When you go back, Minxin, you must be pretty impressed. I mean, Dang Wong also grew up as a young man or as a boy in China, has gone back, and the book is full of stories about how impressed in some ways he is and in other ways less impressed. When you go back, what impresses you about China in 2025?
Well, I actually have not been back because of my criticism of the Chinese government. I'm not sure I can get a visa, or if I get in, whether I can leave safely. So that's
why do you think Wang? I'm not sure if he's still able to go, but why do you think Wang got to go and not you?
Well, he writes about much more technologically related issues. I write a lot more about political issues, so my writings are much more sensitive than his. So I hope he has no trouble going back. I think one thing I do regret is that because of the geopolitical tensions between China and the US, because of the political crackdown in China, there's a lot less information flowing out of China. There's a lot less freedom for researchers to go to China to do research. So people like us probably know less about China than we should.
You wrote something, or you've argued something that's counterintuitive, I think, in some ways, and certainly rather controversial. You've argued that wanting to be a superpower is a foolish endeavor. Is that a message to Xi? Are you suggesting that he's wasting his time, that it's unwise to try? Because he's clearly trying to turn China into a superpower. Perhaps he already has. Massive investment overseas, particularly in Africa. What's wrong, Minxin, with being a superpower, especially if you're a large country with a very rich history like China?
Well, I think it's a message not just for Xi, probably for American leaders, and certainly for Putin. If you want to be so I've observed, as I said, I've been here 40 years. I've observed U.S. society closely. The U.S. is a superpower, has been a superpower since World War II. When you look at being a superpower benefits elites a lot, especially political elites. If you're a U.S. congressman, you go abroad, people actually treat you like somebody, right? Because the U.S. is a superpower. But when you look at average American people, you really have to wonder what they get out of the U.S. being a superpower. Not that much. They don't get universal health care, right? Their retirement protection is relatively skimpy. So that's they have to deal with a pandemic of guns, a lot of drugs. Schools are not that world class. So when you look, other than having a world class military, we really ordinary people living in a superpower really don't enjoy the benefits, the day-to-day benefits of being a superpower. And I think China should learn the lesson. It's a totally useless, it's actually very costly, and it could be self-harming trying to be a superpower.
But again, you know this narrative better than I do. I mean, China was humiliated much of the 19th century, and perhaps one summary of its history over the last 100 years, certainly since Mao, is to restore China to its place, or what seemed to be its rightful place in the world. That's what Putin's doing in a military sense as well. There's more to people than just healthcare systems and how much money they have in their pocket. What about the issue of pride? Haven't the communist leaders restored pride to many Chinese citizens? They may not like everything about the state, its inefficiencies, its corruption, its surveillance, but at least now China is respected in the world.
Well, of course, I think relative to 1840, when China suffered this humiliating defeat at the hands of the British during the First Opium War, the Chinese people today are much more proud. Their international status has risen a great deal. That's an undeniable fact. But then you have to take a step back and ask, how come China was defeated? You really have to go back to the era during which China lost its mojo. That is, China closed its doors, China failed, China missed the Industrial Revolution, China maintained an education system that was woefully out of date, and the Chinese state failed to modernize, and China did not develop genuine dynamic capitalism. So I think you need to go back. If you do not visit that part of the history and only say we're being bullied and we want to get back at those who bullied us, that is not a very productive way of thinking about the world.
Minxin, you're clearly a critic, a very highly respected critic of the Chinese state. Well, what is an alternative narrative then to the communist narrative? Is it Singapore? Is it Japan? Is it Denmark? What might have happened that would have been better for the Chinese state? Or might it just be a more reformist communist party?
I think a more reformist communist party would be the most realistic and the sort of a much better version of what China has today. So the narrative I have is the continuation of the 1980s without Tiananmen. Because in the 1980s, China was moving toward...
So this is Deng Xiaoping's China without Tiananmen Square.
Without Tiananmen Square. And Deng Xiaoping's China, I have to put in some modifications. In the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping relied on very open-minded liberal leaders to execute his policies, like Hu Yaobang, like Zhao Ziyan. These two people carried out the policy of reforming China and opening China to the outside world. Unfortunately, they parted ways with Deng Xiaoping on the issue of democratization and freedom. And as a result, China took a very different path, which ended up with Xi Jinping, not with a less repressive, less aggressive nation.
You've written quite critically about Xi. You noted that he'd be facing a very bad 2025. You're clearly not a great admirer of him. What would you give him credit for? He's a strong leader, and I want to come to whether or not he's reestablishing totalitarianism in China. But how would you credit him as a strong leader? We've done some shows on him in the past. I'm intrigued by the fact that he had such a troubled childhood and experienced such persecution. He really is a hard man, for better or worse, in terms of dealing with misfortune. What do you credit him with?
Well, I would say that the leader, the Xi Jinping we see today, is a very different Xi Jinping. So I would give him credit for learning from his mistakes above all. When he came to power, he was inexperienced, but he was very ambitious, and he had a huge risk appetite. And as a result, he created a lot of problems for himself, for China, and even for the Communist Party. Today, I think in some respects, he's learned a lot. And you can see how he handled the latest round of the trade war with Trump. He did not get humiliated.
He's a tough guy. And I mean, Trump is a wannabe tough guy. And I think Xi actually is a tough guy.
Yeah, so I think that is, but at the same time, he has not really learned how to turn the economy around. He continues to trust in the power of the state. He has not really revived confidence of the private sector in his leadership. And he has not taken very decisive actions to deal with the real estate bubble. So he has allowed the economy to continue to struggle.
As I said, your last book before The Broken China Dream is The Sentinel State, Surveillance and the Survival of Dictatorship in China. Clearly, there is very little, if any, political freedom in China. And Xi has tightened the state, made it more and more difficult to express oneself. Why? Is he trying to turn himself into Mao or Stalin? Is he doing it to pursue his own economic self-interest or the group around him, perhaps like Putin? What drives Xi? Why has he made China so much more repressive than it was under Deng Xiaoping?
First, let me just clarify that the trend toward surveillance, toward using high tech to control the Chinese population began before Xi. But Xi clearly accelerated those trends. So what did Xi try to accomplish? I do not believe he wants to bring back Mao. He does not. He admires Mao a great deal. He wants to be like Mao in certain respects, like the personality cult. He's published more books than Mao. So I mean, he has hit a record. But
I'm sure he doesn't struggle to find a publisher.
No, I think he's the best-selling author in China today.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising.
there were aspects of Mao he clearly does not like. He doesn't like chaos. Mao thrived in chaos. She detests chaos. He likes order. He likes stability. He likes control. So I think if you look at some other totalitarian leaders, the person probably he resembles most is Stalin, and also he.
Well, that's quite a critical thing to say, because Stalin murdered many tens of millions of people.
I think that she is not sort of a
and Stalin was paranoid and bloodthirsty and very unwise in economic terms. It's not entirely clear what Stalin achieved. Xi's China is very different from Stalin's Russia, isn't it?
I think in terms of controlling the regime itself, it's very Stalinistic. That it's the forever purge, the constant purge. China has this anti-corruption campaign going on since she came to power. So we're talking about 13 years. And today, if you look at daily headlines, senior officials are still being investigated, detained, arrested, sentenced for alleged corruption. So this is sort of one aspect of Stalinism that is alive and well in China.
Why has he had such a bad 2025? What's gone wrong for him?
I think 25 is bad mostly in economic terms. In foreign policy terms, I have to say he's done much better than I expected. I think he survived this confrontation with Trump pretty well, because he actually had a trump card that is called rare earth materials. And he used that card brilliantly. And he also kept a relatively low profile on the global stage, did not get into any fight with neighbors. Of course, I think right now there is this row going on with Japan that could be sort of harmful to China. But by and large, on the foreign policy front, he's done better. The real problem, as I said, the economy is stuck in neutral, and it's getting worse based on recent data. So I think as long as the economy is not doing well, he's not going to do well.
So if Xi's watching, I'm not sure if this show even will be seen in China, but if he is, what advice would you give him for 2026, both on the domestic and the foreign front? Should he just loosen the economy? Should he allow more Silicon Valley style innovation, more investment, less state control?
I think these things are necessary, but they're not going to help. I think what is holding back China is really Xi's own future. And so as long as most people believe that he's going to stay there forever, they do not think that policies will fundamentally change. So
are there a younger group of politicians, I assume there are within the party, jostling for success, to become the Xi's successor? Are you more optimistic? Are there liberals in the wings, perhaps younger versions of Deng Xiaoping?
No, right now we don't see any. And of course, in the Hobbesian world of Chinese politics, if you appear to be a breath of fresh air with new ideas, then you're a big target. So most Chinese leaders, even if they have new ideas, they want to conceal them. They don't want to be seen as threats. So I think what is needed in China is a leadership change.
I guess in that sense, maybe the Stalin analogy is more useful, because, of course, when Stalin died, Russia got a rather weak leader, Khrushchev. Is that a concern of yours, that given his totalitarian impulses and his control of power, that when he departs the scene, which at some point I guess he has to, it's inevitable, there'll be a Khrushchev-style leadership vacuum filled by someone who's not that impressive?
Oh, totally. I think China was very lucky in the sense that when Mao died, the immediate successor was weak, but then you had Deng Xiaoping, was a very strong leader, waiting in the wings. Today, you look around in China, you cannot find another version of Deng Xiaoping. And that keeps people very, very worried.
What about public opinion? I know that public opinion in China is highly controversial. No one quite knows what Chinese people want or feel or say because they aren't revealed given the nature of the system. What's your sense of what ordinary Chinese people want?
Well, again, like as you said, we really don't have reliable public opinion data to tell us what Chinese people, quote unquote, really think. But I would assume that Chinese people are no different from people around the world. They can think for themselves. If they feel that their lives are not headed in the right direction, they're going to be very, very upset. And I would say at the moment, because the economy is doing so poorly for most people, especially for the younger generation, public opinion cannot be very optimistic.
How does this bad economy manifest itself, especially in a single year, 2025? Is it increased prices? Is it the absence of jobs? Is it a scarcity of homes? What is the biggest crisis with the Chinese economy?
So when you look at the data, you find something very, very strange. It's not inflation, it's deflation. Prices are not rising, they are falling. That means
that's the Japanese disease, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a disease that is much worse than inflation because not many people are buying. So a lot of people are producing, but not many people are buying. So prices falling. And in the case of China, the most important price is real estate price, housing prices. Housing prices are falling. That means people's net wealth is shrinking. The most valuable asset for an average Chinese household is their apartment. So if their apartment is worth less, they're going to spend less. So you have this vicious cycle. Lower prices, less demand, less wealth. So the economy is stuck in neutral.
Sounds in some ways rather like the United States. Is it conceivable, just as Donald Trump seems to be creating foreign policy crises to take people's minds off current economic gloom in the US, that Xi will do the same, particularly over Taiwan?
It's unlikely. I think there's this mix of sort of diversionary aggression. That is, a dictator facing economic trouble at home will engage in an external war because the logic seems not to work. If you have economic trouble, then probably you're not very good at funding your military. Maybe you're not very good at sustaining a protracted warfare. So if you engage in external aggression, you're likely to lose. So, and Chinese leaders are pretty smart people in that sense. They're not going to take a gamble they cannot win.
So what's your forecast for Xi in 2026? What would you like to see and what do you expect to see?
I think he's going to have so based on current trends, he's going to have a slightly better year in terms of foreign policy. Domestic economic revival, I don't see a lot of hope because he and Trump appear to have got on well. So if Trump goes to visit China in April and strikes some kind of deal with Xi Jinping, then Xi can expect to visit the US sometime in October before the midterms. And that would give Xi a lot of prestige. And so if 2026, if the Ukraine war ends, somehow in Russia's favor, then Xi would also sort of win some points. So I think these are the two most important foreign policy events for him next year.
Sounds like a rather unhappy new year for China and for China watchers. The Broken China Dream, How Reform Revived Totalitarianism, by one of America's leading scholars on China, Minxin. Congratulations, Minxin. I'm not sure whether I should congratulate you on the book. I mean, it's quite an achievement, but it's not really very good news. But it's important to hear bad news as well, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure talking to you.